Hi, so here's a little video today. I wanted to talk again about the technique that I showed in the live feed last week, which was for needle turn applique, which is a really traditional form of applique, much loved by quilters. It's one of my favourites, I have to say. This is going to be the centre of quite a traditional style quilt. And you can see the pattern is actually a copy of an old quilt from a museum. I saw it in a museum a while back, and I've been working on this, and it's got lots of different flowers, and then it's going to have some embroidery as well, but it's all done by hand, and it's you can see already it's a much more a traditional look. It's also a different look to it to when you're using Bondaweb, where everything is quite stuck. So if we compare on here, for example, the leaves have been done using Bondaweb, so they're really flat and quite stiff, whereas these little hearts that I've put on have been done using this more traditional style, so they're a bit puffier. And also you can't see the stitching. The stitching, obviously you have to do stitching when you're using Bondaweb, so you use either a satin stitch or a blanket stitch or something. Sometimes you don't want to actually see the stitching. It gives quite a nice effect, it gives quite a folky effect, I think, but there are times when you want a slightly different effect. So I just wanted to show you 3 different ways to do this method: the very traditional needle turn, then my cheap version using interfacing, and there's another version using tinfoil as well. So I'm just going to run through those 3 different methods just so that you've got, you know, a little basic video to give you those techniques for your kind of your technique arsenal, if you like. So I've done a separate video to show you how to do the bias stems, and I will send that out to you. But the first one I wanted to show you is the very traditional needle turn, and the clue is in the name, really. So let me come in closer. Can I come in? There we go. Just so you can really see what I'm doing. So what I've got here is I've drawn my heart onto my fabric. I then cut around it, and this is less than 1/4 of an inch. It's more like 1/8 of an inch. Okay, I've done this little notch here because this is going to be the hardest bit to turn, because obviously I can't just tuck that under. I need to allow the fabric ease as it goes around there. And this is drawn on with a friction pen. It needs to be drawn on with something that will be removed. I've used a friction pen because you can see it. Be very wary on dark fabrics with friction pens. I know I always say this, but they do leave a ghost mark sometimes. So the way to do it, I've already got my thread threaded in there, and I've done a little bit round here just to kind of show you what's going on. I'm using my thumbnail here up against that line, okay, and then I use the needle, hence the name needle turn, to just tuck that under up to that drawn line. So look, you can see that I've now got that tucked under, and I'm only going to do this little tiny bits at a time. So it's literally going to be sort of, you know, 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch at a time, and then each time I tuck a little bit under, I'm going to take a couple of little tiny stitches, and using the same method I would always use, where I'm going to do that first stab stitch is in exactly the same spot, and then I'm traveling along underneath. I'll show you the underneath in a second, and then coming back through, can you see, through that fold. So it's up through the seam. Okay, so I've only taken 2 stitches there, and look, I'm round the bend, ready for the next bit. So again, tuck that under, and then couple of stitches as I follow it round. Sorry, this might be going in and out of focus because I'm so close. As we go round the bend. Now I haven't pinned this down or anything. You can pin it down, or what you can use as well is it needs to be quite a cheap glue stick, one that is washable, so like a kid-friendly one is absolutely ideal. And all you need to do, because if you're doing quite a complicated design and you've got lots of bits going on, you want to lay them out first, and I would just put a little dab of glue in place, and that would hold it down just long enough for me to stitch it. Okay, because I just want to hold that in place, and it means I haven't got a pin there, because as you probably see as I go round, your thread will keep catching in the pins, and it's really annoying. So I'm just going to carry on going around there. This looks quite slow and unwieldy. It's not once you get the technique. I've slowed this down, but I am usually much quicker than this. So there we go, just a few more stitches, and as I come into that little turn on the heart there, tucking that out of the way, you can see where I've actually put that slit. I can get that quite, if I get that bit out of the way, look, I can take that right down into that corner nice and sharp. I would always say don't use purple thread, because obviously I'm not sewing with purple, but I'm using a thread that you can see because I want you to be able to see it. The whole point of this technique is actually not to see it, but on this occasion I want you to see, and look, you can see just little itsy bitsy stitches on here, and they are tiny weeny stitches. And then all the travelling, if I turn it underneath, all the travelling is happening on the underside here. Okay, and it still looks quite neat underneath. In fact, I'm always quite proud of my needle turn when I look at it underneath. So that's the first and the most traditional method. Now, before you try that method, the one that I would recommend is the one that I use quite a lot actually on this, where I use interfacing to actually turn that tiny little 1/8 of an inch under for me. So if I show you, and I do this because if I'm doing a whole pile of stuff, I had a bag here, there it is. I've got a whole bag here, look, of various bits and pieces, but in this bag I've got dozens of pre-prepared needle turn pieces ready for applique in various shapes to go on my project. So I've got lots and lots of different leaves, different styles, etc. So when I'm doing something with lots and lots of pieces, it means I can actually get lots of prep done, because I can do all of this on the sewing machine. So for example, if I was doing 12 leaves, I'd actually draw all the leaves out so that I can do all the machine stitching of these leaves beforehand. I've drawn round my leaf, so if you've got a template or something, you can just draw around it. And as I say, you can do, as long as you leave enough of a gap, about 1/2 inch in between each one, you could do 7 or 8 of these on whichever fabric you're using. You then lay that on the right side of your fabric, okay, and then take it to the machine. Let me come back out so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm doing a straight stitch, but I've taken that stitch down in length so that it's quite small, probably down to about 1, and then you're just going to stitch all the way around, following exactly on that line, and that's why I take the stitch down quite small. Okay, and as I go around, you can do the lift and turn as you want, but when you're on a very small stitch, we've talked about that before, it's much easier to do that that process. So once you've stitched all the way around your leaf, you then trim it up. So here's a little heart that I've done earlier, and you can see I've now trimmed that up. I'm going to come back in There we go. So I've trimmed it up all the way around again, so that I've got just a tiny seam going on here, and then I've made a slit in the interfacing for turning it through. So I can turn that through. I'm going to reach for my ever faithful lolly stick. Guess which lolly. And then I can just gently press out those curves. I might need something a bit sharper down the bottom in the corner, but when I'm doing curves I use the lolly stick because it smooths it out rather than taking it out. Let me just do something a little bit sharper down the bottom. There we go. Okay, so I've now got that turned, and you can see what this is doing is it's doing the job for you of turning that under. So you've got this tiny weeny little hem. And I think this method is really good when you first start, because it kind of gets you in the habit. It really shows you the technique a lot simpler. So rather than you having to worry about turning it under, I can just pin this in place. And then if I anchor my thread, so a couple of little stitches, this is going to be hidden underneath. Okay, there we go. And then my first stitch, I can come up, and let's try and get this in focus so you can see. I am coming up on the pink side, just above the white, and then stab in exactly the same spot back underneath, travel along underneath, and then once again come up in that spot there. The key is I'm pushing against the white as I stab back down, because what that will do is actually hold the white underneath so that you don't see any of it as you stitch round. And as I say, I think this method is actually very neat, especially on curves and things like that, because it actually gives you time. Because if I get to a bit where I think, oh, not quite as smooth as I want it to be, I can use my needle as I would in the needle turn, and I can just grab the interfacing underneath and just roll it back underneath until I get exactly the shape that I want, so that I can be really smooth going around those curves. And as I say, with this one, if you wanted to, once I'd gone round a little bit further, let me anchor that in there and get a bit of stuffing. I could stuff it as I go. So if I put that little bit of stuffing in there, look, you can see already that let's get it in focus, is quite puffy. So you get this really puffed up finish, which, as I say, is sometimes quite nice when you want a little bit more texture on your project. The final method I wanted to show you is this one with tin foil. I'm going to come back out again here. There we go. And for this you'll need your cardboard template on this. So if, for example, we're using exactly the same fabric here, I would cut around my template, and I'm going to cut around about quarter of an inch on here. There we go. And then I can sit it on the foil, and that's right side is facing the foil, and then I can just use the foil to literally squish to the shape. So as I get down to the corner, look, I can fold that across, and I can just bring that foil in all the way around into that shape. I've done this this heart here was done with foil. Same thing with the heart, I did a little snip down there just to make it easier. And what it's doing, it's bringing that fabric in as you go around. So I can fold that all in until I actually get, and it's easier when you look on the underneath actually, until I actually get that nice smooth leaf shape like that. And then what I do is I iron it and I press it. I'm actually going to press it for quite a while, and the heat is going to use the heat from the iron will obviously heat up the foil, and it will actually press it into shape so that when we take it off it will keep its shape, and then you have to put it down. The problem with this method is it's a little bit harder to pre-prepare, if you like. You'll have to leave them in the foil until you're ready to use them, because otherwise they will lose their turn if they just get, you know, if they're just lying around in your sewing box or something. Okay, so you'd attach that in exactly the same way. As I say, here you can see that it's turned under, but because this has been hanging around on my sewing table, look, you can see it's starting to lose its shape very slightly. So certainly with that method, do it and sew it straight away. These ones can, I mean, those ones in the bag have literally been sitting there for months and months and months, because once it's done, it's going to remain like that, which is one of the reasons why I use it quite a lot. So hopefully that has explained those 3 different ways of doing it, and I'll continue sending you sort of more patterns and things, especially for the applique blocks, and then you can choose your own method. It's whether you like using the sewing machine more or if you like the hand sewing. It doesn't really matter, it's whatever you prefer to do, but I think it's nice to know all these techniques, because if you try them you might find that you actually love it. Okay,